It finally happened. Bethesda, after months of silence, has finally dropped a new release date, trailer, and told us when we'll be hearing more about Starfield. This is the info dump we have been waiting for, and this even includes some of that interesting gameplay on a monitor that you see from afar. And that's actually not a joke. Some of the most interesting gameplay reveals from all of this actually does come from some of the gameplay on employees' monitors in the background. There's going to be a ton to break down overall in this video. I'll have timestamps down below, but first, one of the important things to highlight is Starfield got delayed again, which you may or may not have actually realized when watching this new trailer and kind of commentary from Todd Howard, because Bethesda technically never said Starfield has been delayed again. Since May of last year, Starfield hasn't actually had a release date, but instead a release window. It was set to drop in the first half of 2023, and this was later narrowed down even further at the summer showcase to a release date before June 13th. But earlier today, we got the official launch date announcement trailer for Starfield, and in this, it was described how the game is coming out on September 6th, 2023. So in other words, it's going to be a few months after the designated window Bethesda gave themselves, and this does mark the second delay for Starfield. The game's now going to be coming out 10 months after the originally intended November 11th, 2022 release. There's been a ton of reaction to this online. I feel like you really have two extreme opinions on this. On one hand, many people are praising this delay and actually viewing it as a very positive thing for Starfield. One of the major reasons is, of course, Bethesda's last game was Fallout 76. It released in an incredibly buggy fashion and needed way more time in the oven. So Starfield getting delayed yet again could be a big positive indicator. Bethesda, or maybe even their new Microsoft overlords, are now giving the developers the time they need, so we no longer have these super buggy Bethesda releases that they've largely become known for. And although this definitely could be true, and very likely to some degree will be true, Starfield will release in a less buggy state than it otherwise would have if it stuck to the first half window, my initial reaction to the delay was actually a bit more negative. Not that I necessarily think Starfield's going to be a complete disaster. I think a lot of the gameplay we've seen and even what we'll cover in this video looks absolutely incredible, but I think there is an indicator where games getting numerous delays is rarely a good sign. It seems like Cyberpunk is the core example of a game that did get several delays and still ended up releasing in a very negative state. As far as indicators go, I feel like follow-up delays are not always a good thing. And to me, it's really the narrative shift we've seen around Starfield that gives me a bit of pause. We went from having the game coming out on November 11th and Bethesda and really Todd Howard showing a ton of confidence in that date. That famous quote of the November 11th date is written in ink. But then something clearly happened, something internally. The game got delayed, and then we really didn't hear much of anything from Bethesda. It was largely radio silence. And then after months upon months of barely getting any info, they finally give us a big new reveal to announce that the game was delayed yet a second time. Which again, on its own right, I'm perfectly fine. I'd rather wait to play Starfield when it's ready in a relatively bug-free state than them just trying to rush it out as soon as possible. And even on a far more personal level, from an ad revenue perspective on YouTube, September is a great time for a game to come out. But the second delay just leaves me wondering, well, what happened? How did we go from, yes, we're incredibly confident on this date, it's set in ink, to, oh no, we actually need 10 more months? But at the end of the day, I think the reality of the Starfield release date situation is we don't know. You can look at indicators, you could try and make predictions, but we really don't know what's going on internally at Bethesda. And this definitely could be good news or concerning news. Different people will take it in different ways, and I don't think there necessarily is a right or wrong answer. But the good news is you don't have to wait that much longer, as now Starfield is coming out in 182 days, and we have a solid countdown, a date we can look forward to, a date you can book for time off at work. Another date that you can look forward to is even a bit sooner, as it was also revealed during this that the dedicated Starfield showcase would be coming on June 11th, 2023. This is definitely going to be a bit later than most people had thought. We first heard about this showcase back in January, almost a full 2 months ago now, and they confirmed that this would apparently be a standalone show for Starfield. So this too is actually a pretty interesting situation in that June 11th is typically when Bethesda and Microsoft would have their E3 conference, or even just their summer showcase in general. We know that Microsoft is not attending E3, and in turn Bethesda is not attending E3. And if we assume this is actually a standalone Starfield show, what I think this means is we're going to get a standalone nice maybe hour or half hour long Starfield thing on June 11th, and then perhaps in July or August we'll have the more familiar E3-esque conference from Microsoft overall. I know though, all of that is ahead of us. Thankfully, this trailer we got today has a ton within it to break down and a ton of new reveals. This trailer is really broken down into two separate parts. The first part is an actual trailer with those familiar panning shots and not necessarily a ton of information, but then separately we cut to Todd Howard talking and people playing Starfield in the background and like actually playing the game in real time so we could see what gameplay looks like just from afar. But don't worry, I'll zoom that in for you and definitely have a lot to break down on that front. Starting with the proper trailer, we get some nice panning shots of space and what looks like a never before seen spaceship. And Bethesda showing off this ship right off the bat is definitely no coincidence because it definitely appears like this is the largest ship we have ever seen in Starfield. If you look at the engines on some of the spaceships we've seen in past gameplay or trailers compared to this one, you can really start to get a sense of its overall scale. But then what has easily been one of the most hype moments of this for me is we get a shot at our fateful teaser space station. As what we see here is a proper in-game look at what we saw in the 2018 teaser for Starfield. But now we do know this is going to be called Constellation Star Station LO868. And we don't just get to see it, but we're actually docking here. In the voiceover, we hear a welcome aboard and get a view of the docking sequence. I would not be shocked if this is a very representative look of how docking will look in game. You select the option to dock and likely have a cutscene pop up and play, hopefully one that is optionally skippable. But as you go through the docking sequence, you almost get this cool perspective of the spaceship from the outside, but still being very close up to it. But what has been my favorite shot of this trailer overall is then we get this epic interior panning shot of the space station. And you can really see how massive this thing is. From the interior, this glass dome is massive at the top. But when you're looking at it from the exterior, you can see, oh yeah, that glass dome is just a small part of the station overall. It also seems like LO868 is going to be manned by a Russian.
The eye is showing signs over another one of those big anomalies.
The voiceover accent alone sounds very Russian, but then his clothing, as we can see him on the interior, definitely looks Russian. And even just looking around at the interior, the level of detail Bethesda has added here is insane. I'm not going to be breaking down each of these various monitors, some smarter Redditor will do that, but each of these has a ton of data represented on them, and some of that data may be around the anomaly. We hear during this Russian character's voiceover how there are signs of another anomaly occurring, and this is likely a reference to that warp screen we saw from the original teaser. And before we fully dive into what happens next in this trailer, another thing I want to highlight was this ship just cruising past the station. It isn't entirely clear if this is meant to represent us, if that's us flying up to the space station or just some other random ship flying by, but it's pretty awesome to just casually see two things traveling around each other in space. Seeing ships passing you by while on a space station seems epic and like it'll be a core part of Starfield, and actually getting to see that somewhat play out is really cool. But returning to that anomaly that was mentioned, it seems like the anomaly could be connected to this broader mystery or unique experience we have in Starfield, which is going to be a core plot point. We see a montage of shots all tied around this object. This is the thing, the beginning to answering one of life's greatest mysteries, and now exactly what all of that means, we don't really know yet. We just have heard that that's going to be a part of Starfield, answering those questions, but has been heavily teased and alluded to in the Starfield marketing, and we see a rapid fire of shots doing the same here. It almost seems like during this mining sequence we saw in the main gameplay trailer, we tap into something. Almost like we see this structure or even gain access to this structure in some way. And during this trailer, we can see it having an almost puzzle-like mechanism on it. And whatever order the sequence does go in, it almost looks like it may end with this familiar anomaly-like effect, like we're being transported or sucked into something. I have a feeling this is all going to be events we experience very early on in the game. We know these mining sequences we've seen in the other trailer are going to be right at the very start of the game. It seems like this is going to be the unique thing about us in Starfield. We experience this, we see the structure, we experience the anomaly. That's what makes us stand out, and it seems like that's what's going to make Constellation reach out to us in the first place. But now when it comes to specifics, what's exactly going on in all of these shots we see in the new trailer, it's really hard to break down. There's some similarities and a lot of little clues here or there. These rings have markings on them, and we've seen these markings on other artifacts, and even in the older teaser trailer from a couple of years ago. And the same applies to the alignment of these rings. We've also seen that represented as this broader mystery we are trying to figure out. But whatever it is, we can see from this new gameplay, we are clearly at the center of it. and is likely going to be a core aspect of the story, at least very early on. And although I'm not personally sure what exactly is going on here, I do almost get Interstellar-esque vibes from this all, like that bookcase scene from Interstellar. It almost looks like that's being paralleled in Starfield, where we have an out-of-body experience or are sucked into something just as an individual, not in a spaceship. And then it seems pretty likely this is where we actually see or experience the artifact. That was largely the trailer itself. It was honestly one of the simpler of the Starfield trailers we've had thus far, but thankfully that was not all, as this transitions us into the Todd Howard commentary section, which although brief, did have some new details and of course a ton of great monitor highlights from afar. This section was kind of odd to me in that Todd Howard's commentary definitely seemed a bit more shaky or unprepared compared to other Starfield videos. Just in general, throughout his speaking, there's a lot more ums and uhs compared to past commentary, and almost made it feel like this was filmed to the last minute, or maybe there wasn't a script associated with this one. From some of the employee monitors during this, we could actually see a date of February 27th, and we had heard in the past how there was some internal debate at Microsoft and Bethesda Game Studios as to whether or not to delay Starfield. So perhaps that decision was only just reached in the past week or so, and then in turn, this trailer may have just been put together over the past couple of weeks. Either way, the details we get here are great. It is mentioned that Bethesda Game Studios is surprised as to how much they're able to pour into a game, saying that Starfield is a large game. Seems like this is going to have a ridiculous amount of content. This upcoming Starfield Direct is going to be a deep dive into the game, and they mentioned how it's going to really bring us into the studio. It would be cool if we have a no-clip documentary-esque look at Starfield development here at Bethesda Game Studios. But overall, Starfield was described as a familiar Bethesda Game Studios game that has some very unique aspects to it as well. And though they never explicitly mention a delay, Todd Howard does talk about how long the game is taking briefly.
Look, we know you've waited a long time to play something new from us. Believe it or not, we're kind of the same. We miss it, and we really just can't wait for you all to play it. So thanks, and we'll see you soon.
But as I have mentioned numerous times throughout this video now, all throughout this segment, there's some pretty awesome background footage of just some Bethesda Game Studios employees playing Starfield. This seems like it's pretty raw, like they're just messing around in a relatively recent build of the game taking place on Mars. And this first clip opens up with just running around on Mars. And we can see a few things immediately. We are outside of our spaceship, and it appears our spaceship will always have an icon on it. We can see this marker actually in the world on the spaceship itself, but also on our HUD. You can see this icon will track our ship location as we run away from it. We also get our first look at what is going to likely be a non-Vasco companion. Someone else is exiting the ship with us and actually running towards us as we run away from it. It's way too blurry to make out any concrete details, but it just kind of looks like that familiar Bethesda Game Studios companion following us as we run away. And we also get a nice quick switch to third person and some new running animations with it. There have definitely been some opinions online about these animations. I personally don't mind them. I actually think a lot of the animations we see throughout some of this gameplay look pretty good. And this continues on to the next clip where we see more of those running animations, but now with a weapon drawn. It almost looks like our reticle is going to be a pinkish color here, which is interesting, but also how there will be several zoom levels in third person. And even as we run up to some crashed objects, we can see that familiar quick loot screen does pop up, just like we had in Fallout 4. And our companion is right there along with us. You can actually see their shadow as they run up side by side with us as we're looting. Unfortunately, we never get a proper look at this companion though. And in the next clip, we also get a decent look at this weapon that is being used. It just kind of looks like it's going to be a basic AR that you likely get early on into the game. And then we get into some combat. We can see our jetpack being used to nudge us in certain directions, almost like a dodge mechanic where you slightly dash in one direction. One of the incoming shots from the enemies actually hits some of the debris ahead of us, and you can see some pretty great looking visual effects as a result. The shot bounces off and there's all kinds of debris and a spark created. It's a relatively small detail, and obviously we are way zooming into this video, but I thought this looked really good. And we get official confirmation this is on Mars, with a Mars factory location. Mars is going to be home to Cydonia in Starfield, which is very likely to be the fourth major city in the game, so I wouldn't be shocked if this is a core planet we are constantly visiting and has a lot of activity on it. And these clips continue further into the combat. The bullet tracers of the enemy weapons do seem particularly pronounced during this. I do wonder if this is just going to be a general effect on all weapons, or if it's this specific weapon type that enemy is using that makes these tracers seem so prominent. There's also this explosion off in the distance that just looks odd to me, like not necessarily in a negative way, but almost like this could be affected by the gravity on Mars or some kind of unique grenade we may have thrown. And from there, we do get a look at some of the other weapons. We switch to our familiar PDW that we saw in the previous gameplay, but also a new pistol that does seem like it could be a new reveal here. I don't know, it is always just fun to see some raw-esque gameplay of Starfield, someone just playing around in the game. You get several other closer up short clips of this where you get a much better look at some game details. Here the player is walking up to some kind of windmill looking structure that we have seen in past gameplay. And there's a couple of notable things. On the one hand, we do have a revolver in our hand. Revolvers are confirmed for Starfield. And even further, this transition from running to walking just looks really smooth to me. One of the first things we heard about Starfield was how the animation system was getting a big upgrade, and I feel like that's on display here. I think this is a clear cut above what we had in past Bethesda Game Studios games. And we also have this red dot on our HUD, which seems to be new, and it's not totally clear what that red dot means. This clip is just pretty. The LOD, aka how details are generated in the distance, seems to be quite good here. You can see quite a bit of detail and quite a bit of detail fairly far into the distance. As well as we have a really nice archway, which as far as I can tell, there really aren't that many archways in Bethesda games, or perhaps never archways in Bethesda games thus far. And honestly, with this clip, I don't have a ton to point out specifically, but just looking at it overall, it looks really good. This game is visually stunning. But then we transition to yet another planet, as well as a look at some new armor in this scene. It is very brief, but you can see some more of those new animations, but also what appear to be some new creatures. It almost looks like it's going to be an adult and child creature, and the child creature is running away here. The creature does turn and kind of do a bit of a wonky animation, but in general, things look pretty good. A lot of what we're seeing of these planets just makes me want to explore them and get excited to actually explore a wide array of diverse environments. We get the first proper look at inventory in Starfield. This appears to be the helmet subsection of our general inventory. So unlike how it works in both Fallout and Skyrim, you don't just have all of your armor pieces listed, but instead you could actually specify helmets and then see all of your helmets. And the naming of some of these helmets may reveal a couple of new factions. There is the Trackers Alliance, which definitely sounds like poachers or bounty hunters. There's also Space Truckers, and then several general purpose helmets like Ground Crew or even a Navigator. And it seems like these have genuine purpose-built differences. Damage resistances from Fallout appear to be returning. So you're going to have a general damage resistance stat, which you can see here under DR, but also on the right side, the helmets have far more sub-stats. As it looks like each helmet and perhaps even each armor piece in general will have 7 sub-defensive stats. And these appear to be separated into 2 categories that are going to be combat and environmental. On the top, we can see physical damage resistance, energy damage, as well as EM, which is likely electromagnetic damage. And it seems like these are the types of attacks enemies can use against you and your resistance to them. So you can almost spec into different types of resistances to try and be stronger against certain enemy types. But under it, a bit more unique to Starfield are the 4 environmental forms of protection, with thermal, airborne, corrosive, and radiation. This likely being things that will drastically vary from planet to planet. So having the right protection could really determine if you could even visit certain planets. Like maybe early on, your armor just won't have good airborne resistances, so it's going to take some time for you to actually be able to live on certain planets. But then you could also see things like helmet's mass and value, and even at the bottom, there's an option to hide your helmet when in a breathable environment, which is a really nice quality of life feature. Overall, these armors look absolutely amazing. Starfield has been knocking it out of the park with armor designs, and this is definitely being continued here. And this applies to creature design as well, as we also do have a clip of the hunting maggot maw. This looks pretty similar to that other creature we saw in the previous gameplay, but definitely different. I mean, honestly, both of these creatures, especially the maggot maw, looks like it is straight out of a horror movie. And one of the interesting takeaways we could see on this one is it is a level 75 enemy. That's pretty up there. Typically, Fallout or Skyrim enemies don't get to that high of a level. And it makes you wonder if this is either just going to be an incredibly high level creature, or maybe even just Starfield has a much higher level cap for enemies, like going up to 100. Overall, this new trailer got me incredibly excited and hyped for this game, even more so than I was previously. For me, this interior space station shot is just epic. I've watched this old teaser trailer so many times, and actually getting to see it in game and get to see the inside of it was just a really special moment for me. I'm really happy Bethesda added that. Not to mention, it looks like the game got a nice visual upgrade, which feels all the more rare with game previews nowadays. And although there are some mixed reactions to the animations, I generally thought they looked really positive. And for what we've seen in this gameplay, it seems like the response to it in general is very positive. After we got the gameplay trailer, there was definitely some critique, some things to point out that looked a bit rough. But this newer gameplay definitely looks a lot more polished and solid, running at a higher FPS, but also just more complete and good looking overall. Hopefully you guys found this video informative because I am absolutely exhausted. Bethesda was kind enough to drop this new trailer right as a return from vacation, which, although genuinely being quite nice because I wasn't on vacation anymore, I did only sleep 3 hours on the plane and spent a good chunk of the past 24 hours traveling, and then immediately came home to make this video. So now I'm gonna go eat some bad fast food and probably sleep for like 14 hours.